Roberta did not like these annual regional conferences, but the fact that she was a member of her professional association made her participation in them almost mandatory. She almost never made useful contacts with them. Lectures and seminars rarely introduced her to new and interesting research results and the social benefits of communicating with other people who had similar names on their peer. Business cards were overestimated, but she was here again, and yet another simple black dress that showed off enough of her curves to attract the attention of men who treated the conference like a vacation from their wives. She was standing on the edge of another noisy crowd in another hotel conference room, sipping another mediocre white wine and pretending to listen to a promotional speech by a man in an ill-fitting tuxedo who was currently trying to get to know her. He was the only one doing all the talking. The business card she had just handed to the man, in the hope of ending their one-sided conversation before she actually fainted from boredom, had her name on it, Dr. Roberta Williams, and confirmed her accreditation as a clinical psychologist. She dutifully accepted the other man's business card, tucking it into her purse as if she really wanted to look at it someday. The man finally realized the fact that he was wasting his time. He apologized impolitely and went in search of some other attractive woman. Roberta finished her drink, and more than anything, she wanted more. She made her way through the crowd to one of the temporary bars in the hall, squeezing through a crowd of men who skillfully positioned themselves so as to achieve the maximum number of contacts. She noticed that a couple of them had very sensual hands. Her mobile phone rang, and she stopped to answer, cupping her hand to her ear, trying to block out the noise of the crowd. "Oh, hello, darling." She said, "Yes, I'm in the center." Noisily, "I'm sorry about that. I miss you too, honey. If you were here, I'd be in my room alone." "With you?" "Not here in this crazy crowd. Yes, I'm wearing a black dress with a slit on the left leg. I know you like it. I'll model it for you again when I get back. Think about me later." "Good night, darling. I love you." While Roberta got to the bar and refueled, she started to turn away, heading for a quiet corner where she could be left relatively alone, and immediately ran into another woman who was in as much of a hurry to get to the bar as Roberta was to get away from it. They exchanged hasty apologies. Fortunately, the drinks were not spilled. Something about the hat woman caught Roberta's attention, and without knowing why, she stayed where she was until the back woman picked up her drink and headed in the opposite direction. Roberta had no idea why this particular woman might be the one she should get to know better. But she knew better than to ignore such good moments. Luck was Roberta's favorite word. She smiled at the woman, shifting the glass from her right hand to her left so they could shake hands. Roberta knew that her interest in this woman was not the same as that of a man on a mating hunt, but she definitely noticed the other woman's sparkling eyes, charming smile, well-groomed figure, and a sense of classic elegance in her outfit that matched her own. They exchanged personal introductions, confirming to Roberta what she had always known. The simplest verbal greetings made much more sense than business cards. The woman's name was Helen. Roberta liked her immediately. Roberta and Helen got along from the very beginning. They had so much in common that Roberta found it a little strange, although she intuitively guessed it when she first saw Helen. They both practiced psychology in the same city. Both were divorced mothers. Both had sons who still lived at home when they were in college, and both were glad to find an oasis of friendship in the desert of insincerity that surrounded them. 10 minutes later, they left the ridiculously crowded meeting room together. A man in a terrible tuxedo, who had previously unsuccessfully tried to pick up Roberta, saw them leave and felt a surge of relief. Roberta and Helen found a small table in one of the hotel's waiting rooms. They sat, talked, laughed, and took turns signaling the waitress to bring more. They talked about the movies they had seen, the restaurants they had visited, the books they had read, the clothes, and the difficulties of raising their sons. Roberta realized that it had been too long since she had had a fun conversation with anyone about girly things. Their conversation was light and relaxed and surprisingly calming for both women. It made them both feel completely relaxed and very at ease with each other, as if they had known each other for many years. A musical phrase sounded on Helen's phone. Helen took the phone out of her purse and, looking at it, apologetically told Roberta that it was a call she had to answer. "Hi, honey," Helen said to the caller. "I'm fine. I have to leave here tomorrow afternoon." "I'll see you tomorrow night. I love you too." This, while it was my son, Helen explained, as if some explanation was needed. "He's at a friend's house, watching a movie late, and he didn't want me to panic if I tried to call him at home and they couldn't. Mine called me earlier," Roberta said. "I don't know how they survive without us," she added with a laugh. "I would tell you about mine, but it would be too much like small talk." Helen said, "I know what you mean, Helen. I feel the same way." "I doubt it, Roberta," Helen said, her voice a little slurred from the drink. "I'll tell you a secret, and you'll find out why I need my professional training to handle household chores." There was a long pause before she continued. "My son is more attached to me than is good for both of us." Roberta stared at Helen for a moment before speaking. "Me too, Helen, me too. Coincidence after coincidence," she thought to herself. "I may have had too much to drink, but I'm going to tell you this anyway," Helen said. "Frank, that's my son's name. He's much closer to me than my ex ever was. Therefore, I doubt that your home situation is in any way similar to mine." "My situation may be very similar to yours," Roberta said. "Have you ever wanted to make love to him?" "I want it." Helen stared wide-eyed at her new friend. "That's what I wanted too." Actually, her voice trailed off as she thought of the best way to finish her thought. "I know what you were going to say," Roberta said. "Oh my God," Helen said softly, "and I thought I was the only one. If I didn't have to get up early to take part in the panel session tomorrow morning, I'd talk about it all night," Roberta said. "I never thought that I would meet someone who understands these feelings the way I do." They exchanged business cards, having previously written their home phone numbers and email addresses on the back, and left the living room to go to their rooms. Helen hugged Roberta warmly when they said goodbye for the night, and Roberta responded to this. "I'll tell you another secret, Roberta," Helen whispered. "I like what Frank and I are doing." "You didn't have to tell me that, Helen," Roberta whispered. "I already knew that. I was there too, remember? I also like what Jeffrey Take and I are doing." They felt a kinship that stems from an unusual shared experience, and would never again feel alone in this intolerant and unsympathetic world. Roberta and Helen left the conference and went home the next afternoon, confident that they would have some kind of contact with each other in the coming weeks. It was even possible that they could form a long-term friendship, a friendship based on a part of their lives that was supposed to remain their shared secret forever. This contact began with an exchange of emails. "My dear Roberta, you can't imagine how much I appreciate what you did for me last week. You gave me the opportunity to look at myself, Frank, and our closeness with pride and confidence. I told him everything I know about you last night. He asked me what you looked like and what you were like wearing. I surprised myself by being able to describe you quite easily, and I rather mischievously didn't omit any of the stimulating details that I know he wanted to hear. You are a magnificent and amazing woman. Roberta, by the way, he's handsome and an amazing partner. In bed. You'd like to love him as much as I do. If it were up to Frank, I'd give you a chance to do just that. Love, Helen." "My dear Helen, I have just read your letter for the 4th time. I could write it myself. From the moment Jeff asked me how the conference went, I've been talking about you as if you were the only event of the week worth mentioning. I have no doubt that Frank is an amazing partner, and he has begun to play a role in my fantasies. But I believe that you would find in Jeff as much fun and everything that you could wish for from a young partner. He told me that he would really like to prove it to you himself. I want to talk to you again soon, Helen, if only to make sure that my pleasant memories of our brief first meeting were accurate and deserved to be continued. I've booked a table for 2 for lunch on Wednesday at that wonderful Italian place I told you about, just a block south of my office. At exactly 12 o'clock in the afternoon, I hope you'll find a way to join me then. Love, Roberta." Roberta was waiting in the restaurant when Helen came in. They greeted each other. They looked through the menu and quickly placed an order. Then they continued their conversation from where they had left off a week earlier. But this time, there was an important difference. They opened up to each other in a way they had never opened up to anyone else, and there was no denying the heady mix of affection that grew out of it. They showed each other pictures of their sons. They felt like little girls. The dinner was as delicious as the conversation that accompanied it. A week later, The sons invited the women to dinner at a trendy, tasteless, diner-style establishment, specializing in huge burgers, absurdly greasy ice cream, and music from a real jukebox that was still playing Elvis's Love Me Tenderly for a quarter of an hour. Frank flirted shamelessly with both women, and it was easy for Jeff to play the same game with them. The women liked it. Then they went to the 2-part repertory cinema and sat in the very back row of the almost empty hall. After the intermission, they tried the same thing with each other's mother in another equally forgetful film. They weren't shy about the people in the cinema. They did it all together. The 4 of them did what they wanted in the cinema, and they weren't even ashamed. It took another 2 weeks and several exchanges of emails and phone calls. But in the end, everything was arranged. The 4 of them will have dinner and spend the evening or maybe the night together. Helen offered to throw a party because her house was more spacious than Roberta's apartment. It would be a kind of extended double room. The 2 women hoped to separate and swap places with both their sons and themselves. It was this last element of the situation, the opportunity for Roberta and Helen to experiment if they wanted to, that made them look forward to the party in equal measure with impatience and apprehension. On that momentous evening, Roberta and Jeff arrived at Helen's, dressed for a party. Robert was wearing a casual men's-style shirt and dark brown leather trousers, which he was able to find in a clothing store she visited the day before. She also found a pair of low boots there. Jeff went to the store with her. It gave him great pleasure to watch how the pretty saleswoman struggled to fasten the side zippers, her trousers, while Roberta tried them on. So it was relatively easy to squeeze into the trousers, but they were very tight when they were in place. He even considered going back to the store later and buying a pair for himself, just to let the saleswoman do the same practical service for him. Jeff was wearing a blue pinstripe shirt with an open collar. It was the end of summer, but there were already hints of autumn in the air, and the nights had been very cool lately. They diplomatically left their luggage in the car. He would have been there if he had been needed. But it would have been awkward to keep him in plain sight in the house if staying the night just wasn't possible. Helen met them at the door, wearing a bright red sleeveless knee-length dress with a plunging neckline. Helen hugged Roberta tightly. She was pleased. Roberta's smile showed that it had an effect on her guest as well. Jeff waited his turn, and when Helen was done with Roberta, she turned to him, and they hugged. The 3 of them went into the living room, where Frank was preparing a tray and preparing to pour everyone wine for an aperitif. He stopped what he was doing as soon as he saw Roberta. "Wow," he said, smiling at her. He took Roberta in his arms. She was pleased that her new trousers had the desired effect on the young man. Dinner followed in the dining room, and then the 4 of them returned to the living room. Soft background music was turned on, and coffee was served in mugs with a drop of liquor in each. The men sat next to their mothers on sofas facing each other. Tension filled the room. Everyone seemed to be expecting someone else to start what was about to happen. No wonder Frank moved first. Jeff and Roberta watched for a moment, and then hugged tightly, too. All 4 of them were watching each other intently. "I like it," Roberta whispered. As Roberta had predicted, the men had reached a point where they could no longer hold back. They all made love together. In the end, the 4 of them lay quietly on the carpet, their breathing gradually slowing down to a more normal rhythm, their minds and bodies feeling satisfied. And then Jeff went and got the luggage out of the car. Obviously, he and Roberta will need him for the whole night. They extended the hotel room for another week and did whatever they wanted there. That's real love.